Hi, and welcome to the Healers Connection. We have a very, very special program today about handling the holidays after a loss in a COVID world. And I have two specialists, experts on grief, who are going to be helping you to answer your questions. I'm Dr. Michelle Petacola, the founder of Second Chance Secrets and Secrets of Life and Death. And I actually had my start as a grief coach, as a grief group facilitator, helping people to navigate the difficulties of a major loss, particularly partner loss, but any kind of loss. You're welcome here, because a lot of the things that happen to you, both in your body and your mind and spirit, are similar. It's almost as though the universe has thrown us a major challenge to help us grow. Now that's one of the perspectives I use. In fact, I did a program called The Grief Gateway, because I do see your incredible challenge as an opportunity to reinvent yourself, to rebuild who you really are and understand who you are based on your experience. So having said that, we're going to be talking about grief and the holidays. And in this particular holiday, we are still in the pandemic, which makes things doubly difficult because we don't have the support that we used to have, like people coming over for a cup of tea or bringing food or pulling you off to go see a movie when you're struggling with grief and loss. In a lot of ways, you're on your own. But there are a number of tried and true practices that you can use during the holidays that will help you to get through the holidays and maybe even allow yourself to enjoy some of them. And now I'm going to share with you, before we begin, one of the best tips I have for you when it comes to grief and loss. My number one tip, the one that I teach first when I work with people, is to allow your emotions. Emotions, emotion. Emotions need to move. And when you don't allow them to move, they actually get stuck in your body. And you have to use a lot of muscular energy to hold your emotions back. So I say, allow your emotions, release them. Now, some of you may have difficult time doing that because you've been taught, maybe from early childhood, not to release your emotions. You've been taught to hold them back, especially in this American culture. We are really taught to not make other people feel uncomfortable with our grief. In the holidays, a lot of things can come up for you, old memories, places where you used to go, and they can be both bittersweet or they can be searingly painful. So it's really important for you to step into this practice of allowing your emotions. Now, that doesn't mean yelling at anybody who comes in your vicinity or crying all over people. I actually teach a specific method for releasing emotions that helps you not get stuck in your sadness or your anger. And so I would like to offer you a special audio that can help you to allow your emotions to release. And it's called Stress Release Body Scan. So it actually helps you to get into your body, find out where your emotions are, and release them. And you can get a copy of this by going to releaseandthrive.com. If you go to www.releaseandthrive.com, you get to a form to go ahead and get this audio. And I encourage you to use it throughout every day, if you can, throughout the holidays, so that you can kind of cleanse yourself to have that release every day, because the emotions, they keep on coming back. They're going to be coming back for a long time if you've gone through a major loss. All right, now you are waiting for our panel, so I want to do some introductions, and then I will bring them on. Or maybe I'll bring them on one at a time. Let me get Nancy up. Nancy, hi Nancy, welcome, is a licensed clinical social worker and certified life coach, and a #1 international bestselling author, consultant, speaker, and life-changing expert who knows firsthand what it is like to deal with serious loss and grief after a devastating car crash. We're going to ask you a little more about that. Combining her professional expertise with her personal experience with fibromyalgia and traumatic brain injury, Nancy offers a unique perspective in her transformational methodology, 7 power practices to managing your mind and healing your heart, TM. I guess that's a trademark. Nancy specializes in both human and pet loss. She's a specialist in pet loss and holds dear a mission to make differences in how the world perceives, understands, supports, and heals loss and grief. Inspiring hope and healing with wit and wisdom, Nancy's varied media presence includes TV, radio, podcasts, interviews, summits, magazines, and books. Nancy's uplifting journey with her Mexican hairless service dog was documented in the TV series Animal Planet. So I will be giving you more information, or she will, about how to contact her when we get further into today. Now, the next person I want to introduce is Carol Pilkington. Pilkington, I misspoke. Carol is first and foremost a teacher of life and what it means to be a human. Carol, I'm right on the same page with you. We accumulate a multitude of hurts the longer we live, which include many losses of all types that keep us in a state of grief. More accurately, in a state of suffering. Carol shows people how to lift themselves out of the fog of suffering into a life of joy, love, and grace. Carol, welcome, and Nancy, welcome. And I would like to start with the question, how did you get into this? Now, Nancy, I know you had a car accident, but Carol, I want to ask you too. So go ahead, Carol, you go ahead first and say a little bit about what drew you to this topic, which is very, very challenging. And oftentimes you're dealing with people who are in a lot of pain. Nancy, tell us a little bit about this car accident and how it brought you to the work that you do.
Which one would you like it to go first?
Nancy. I just asked Nancy, and then I'll ask Carol. Carol. Go ahead, Nancy. Are you unmuted?
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Great. Okay, we can.
Good. I was a licensed clinical social worker with a private practice for 17 years. The last 6 of those were after this devastating car accident that was a huge life-defining moment. I think one of the biggest I've ever had before then and since. It the moment the metal of our cars collided, my life path was forever changed, and I ended up having to surrender. Although at the time I thought I was surrendering, but really I was giving up. So that's something I'll talk about a little bit later. But
great.
There's a difference, and I had to close my practice, and then I went on a long journey, which incorporated my finding this rare breed dog, the Mexican hairless, to use as kind of to replace the 24/7 microwave neck wrap that I used for my chronic pain on my neck. And I got a 24/7 no microwave hot dog. I put her around my neck and called her Toaster. And that's what Animal Planet's story is all about, is Toaster, and then her pregnancy and whelping and giving her puppies to people around the country who had fibromyalgia.
Wow.
Service dogs as I used her.
Nancy, was fibromyalgia a result of the car accident?
Oh, 100%. That's, yeah, when I say life-defining moment, my life changed completely. I never had sleep problems before my car accident, and that is a huge part of fibromyalgia that we struggle with. So yeah, I didn't have any of these problems until after the accident.
Wow. Okay. Carol, I would like now to ask you what your story is. Briefly, tell us, how did you get into this particular arena of coaching?
Well, I've always been doing transformational work with people. And for me, my father passed away in 2004, and I wasn't there by his side when he died. And I felt tremendous guilt about that. And the years went by, and I realized that the simple reason for that was I was not ready to be. And when I recognized that, something just completely and fully released for me, that I had been grieving over the fact that I had not, or suffering, if you will, and beating myself up over not having been there by his side. That it's as though the guilt took over everything and defined my whole relationship with my father, right? And like that one moment was going to mean that he didn't love me anymore, that he didn't love me my whole life. So when I really recognized that, everything just kind of released, and I was able to become more present to my life as it is and remember him with joy and love.
Awesome. That is so important. And so, of course, I'm sure you teach your clients to do the same kind of thing, to change their story about things. And sometimes you can literally change your story in an hour or less, and it can totally change your perspective. Our minds are so powerful. So, Carol, thank you for mentioning that. So I want to remind our guests who are on the show that you can post your questions in the chat, or you can actually unmic or raise your hand, and then we'll make sure you're unmiked and you can ask your question. Or we can even bring you up on stage if you would like that too. All right, so the next question is, what about this holiday time? How does that impact somebody's ability to deal with loss? Why is that so important? And do you have a special tip on how to get through the holidays for our listeners? Nancy, you want to go first, or actually raise your hand? Who wants to go first on that question? Nancy, go ahead.
Happy to share. I think one of the most important impacts of COVID has had for pet parents is that we're not allowed to be with our pets if they're sick, if they're ill, if they're dying, if they have to be, as I call it, lifted up instead of put down. And that is a tremendous loss in and of itself, to not be able to be present.
Yeah, and we can't do that because of COVID. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. They pick your pet up, whether they're, sick, need some kind of treatment, or are dying and need to be lifted up. They pick their pet up at their car door. They pull up to the curb, the vet comes out, or the vet tech comes out, and they take your pet.
So that's if you're taking your pet to the vet. Are you suggesting maybe you don't want to take your pet to the vet?
Well, I'm suggesting it as another loss that occurs.
Yes.
Pets who don't have a choice.
Right. But do you have a choice? If you know that your pet is dying, do you have the choice to keep that pet at home and provide it with comfort care?
Yes, you can do that, and you can have a mobile vet for sure. But I guess I'm talking about those people who are perhaps in a crisis because they've waited they've avoided facing it. They've waited long that now they don't have a choice. They have to bring their pet in, because vets are not coming to the home to do anything pretty much except euthanize. Maybe pets around the country vets around the country that will come to your house and treat your animal, but largely you have to go to the vet hospital.
Okay. So I haven't had a pet in a long time. I have had pets, but it's been a long time. I prefer to have my pets out in the wildness and living their own life and taking care of their own needs. But I appreciate people who have pets, especially if you're living alone. Pets are really important companionship. And aren't they unconditional love? So I really appreciate that. So thank you for sharing that, either for our listeners today or for listeners that will be reviewing this recording later. To know that's one of the challenges, and to be aware that if you do send your pet to the pet hospital, you might miss that opportunity to have those final moments with your pet, which was always something that you could have in the past, right? Thank you, Nancy, for that important point. How about you, Carol? What can you say about grief during this COVID lockdown, and what you have noticed with your clients and what kind of support they need?
I think it's really important to express what you need. A lot of times people don't know how to approach someone who has experienced grief and a deep loss. And so they need to be actually told how they want to be supported. So don't be afraid to tell people how you need support during this time, whether you feel the need to be alone, whether you need to be around people, certain people, allow yourself to express your needs. It's so very important. So then it allows others to support you in the way that you need to be supported.
Carol, you make such a good point. Oftentimes the people, our loved ones, want to support us, but they're not sure what's going to work. And sometimes they're afraid to bring the subject up or talk about it because they don't want to create more pain for you. Mm-hmm. And so they are quiet, and then you feel abandoned. So it's really important to give them guidance if you can.
Right.
So isn't it true that sometimes people don't really know what they want?
Absolutely. And that's, perfectly okay as well. I don't know what I really need. I don't know what I want. It's just about expressing what is in the moment, because that in and of itself can release some tension and anxiety and awkwardness.
That's right.
Really
I just don't know. Now, I mean, in this COVID time, it depends on how comfortable you are, but asking for a hug. Have you ever asked if you can allow yourself to have a hug?
Absolutely.
I think that's one of the hardest things about this COVID pandemic is that we have really been reduced in the amount of hugs we get. Mm-hmm. And as these human bodies need hugs. We need physical contact. It's really hard for our system to go without that for so long. It's like we've been on a hug fast for 2 years in many ways. And so if there are people that you feel comfortable with, that have been vaccinated, maybe they're wearing a mask, and you can allow yourself to be hugged, maybe wash your hands right afterwards, receive that. So I want to open it up again. If you have, Nancy, any more points to make on how to handle grief in the COVID holidays. And by the way, if any of you guests have some suggestions, please chime in and join us. Oh, there, Harriet, go ahead, unmute yourself and share with us what you have about the holidays.
My question has to do with community loss. There, whenever there is a death, you get the spontaneous shrine in the area, but there are community, and then you can't do, your normal funeral or your normal whatever. I mean, I've watched on Zoom so many memorials. So my question is, how do we deal with community grief when communities are hurting because shit has happened?
That's a really, really good question, Harriet. Thank you so much. So Carol or Nancy, either of you want to jump in there and take that question?
I think it's really important for people to be honest about where they are and the losses that they're experiencing and feeling, and possibly to ask around, and don't be shy about asking 1 or 2 or 3 people, what their habits are, if that's a concern for you, to be able to gather together and rebuild that community, because I know that there's a lot of fear out there around these things. And so it's going to be important to rebuild that community. And also, unfortunately, we have to accept things as they are as well and honor other people's concerns and do just what we can in order to be with one another. I know that over the past year and a half, I would get together with friends on a Friday night through Zoom, and we would sit there and actually have dinner together as if we were in the same room. So I know it's not the best, but we have to make do sometimes with what we have just to be able to have some kind of human connection.
Carol, really, really good points. And Nancy, you want to add to that?
Yeah, because I think one of the most important gifts of community that could be tapped into in this time period is that people are connected with each other. If you take that connection a step farther in the COVID world and have sort of a Zoom meeting on the computer in which people maybe buddy up, maybe, you know, people who are more isolated or more introverted could be matched up with someone within the community who is more, you know, able to offer support and hook those people up. So there's kind of like almost a COVID accountability partner kind of.
A COVID buddy. Yes. I love it. So Harriet, I really wanted to address also that idea of the community and how can we really honor the community. So last year, or no, it was this year in April, my spiritual teacher passed. And I had been studying with a spiritual teacher for almost 40 years. So it was a huge loss. I mean, I used to go, if not every summer, every other summer, to his spiritual retreat in New Mexico. And there were thousands of people on his mailing list. And we had a special Zoom memorial. I couldn't go to his actual memorial where they buried him, when they buried him in New Mexico, but we were all able to come on this, the Zoom call. And each of us who asked for it were allowed to speak for, I don't know, 5 minutes, and tell our story. And so we got to hear different people's stories about their relationship with our spiritual teacher. And it was powerful and it was healing. I think part of the whole purpose of memorial is for us to create a closure, to create that sense of the history of that person. And so we heard from people who had been with him since the very beginning and people who were more recently involved with him and how he changed their lives. And it was very, very healing.
I appreciate that because, of course, working with Malidoma and Sobonfu is the grief ritual person, and we supported her around that and learned how to do grief rituals, although there's mixed feeling. And then, you know, earlier this week, her husband, former husband, Malidoma, passed.
Oh.
And, you know, funds are being raised to send his body back to Burkina for the burial of an elder. So there are events on the East Coast, and there'll probably be events on the West Coast because he's known everywhere. But again, so I appreciate your sharing the story in terms of this Zoom memorial and people being able to share their stories, because the grief rituals are always an opportunity to really let it out in whatever way it needs to be and be witnessed and held.
You're absolutely right. And aren't we so blessed to have Zoom? That this pandemic did not happen when we didn't have Zoom. That Zoom has given us an opportunity to stay connected in the midst of all of this. It is not the same as touching. I've read a book on elephant grief, and it turns out that elephants will stay with the grieving mother or the grieving child, stand around it, and then give it plenty of time and room to grieve, And then they reach out with their trunks and they move that person forward.
Yeah.
So there's that touching, there's that feeling of that community surrounding you. And it's hard in this COVID world. Fortunately, a lot of us have taken the vaccine and we're less susceptible than before. It's not so death threatening as it was in the beginning. And so if you can, as Carol was talking about, speak to people about what works for them and whether you can meet with them. And I know that I have met with several people in person without masks because we have decided that we're okay. We also are all pretty secluded anyway, so we don't get out that much. So thank you, Harriet, for a really, really excellent question. Any final comments for Harriet? Or
Where are you located, Harriet?
I'm currently in Hayward, California, but
Oh, okay,
I've
you're up
grown
north.
up in Oakland.
Thank you.
I'd also like to say a positive thing about Zoom, in addition to what you've said, Michelle, and that is that because we can see each other all at once, it does allow for more connection, even if it's passive connection, just by looking at all the faces in the gallery, as opposed to being in person and sitting in rows where you're not able to see other people at the same time. So, you know, I always see the glass half full. And
No, I appreciate that. When we did our Thanksgiving last year, we all, I mean, it was quite something, but you know, we all had our food and there was a picture of the food and you know, we ate together on Zoom and it was beautiful.
it's wonderful. It sounds like you're really doing a lot given this with your community, given the circumstances.
Yeah, and I'm so sorry for your loss. It can be very, very challenging and painful and hurtful, you know. And what do you do after that? And how do you pick up the pieces, which is, of course, the other part of grief. What other questions? I lost my list of questions in the solar flares. And do either of you have a question that you would like to answer? Or Rita or Chia, if you have any questions, please either post it in the chat or, you know, raise your hand and let's hear from you.
Yeah, one of the questions that I posed that I was going to be talking about was the fact that there's a difference between grief and suffering.
Oh, yes, please do talk about that.
Grief is, you know, the immediate experience that we have when there's a loss of any kind. But when we don't acknowledge it, acknowledge the loss and our feelings and emotions and our experience about it, whether it's anger, sadness, guilt, whatever, and we don't allow ourselves to process it fully, and we just shove it down and push it down and avoid it, then it becomes suffering. So it's no longer grief per se, we are suffering. And that is, you know, as Pema Chodron and others have said, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And this is when grief becomes suffering. And we need to allow ourselves that process, whatever it may be, a ritual or just deep, deep acknowledgement of what is there around the loss, so that we can really live our lives now. The people that we leave behind that die, that loved us, that we love them, I can't even imagine, I know for myself, the people that I've lost, they wouldn't want me to live in the past and not live my life fully with joy and love and meaning. So it's really important.
So it's important to look at the difference between the actual physical consequences of loss, and there are. The studies have shown that it's very similar to it's the same survival mechanism that gets triggered when you lose somebody, because hello, we're social beings. And our connection to other people is part of our survival mechanism. And when we lose them, it really puts us in that state of uncertainty and dis-ease. And it affects us on a physiological level. It affects us in terms of what goes on with our brains. It's like literally our brain, it's like travels along these neural pathways that have been created for years, however long you've been in that relationship, and then suddenly reach this black hole, and it's disorganizing. It actually takes time for the brain to reconnect the neural networks and create new neural networks. So oftentimes they certainly talk in hospice about it being sometimes 3 months before they even invite people to grief group, because those first 3 months you're often in shock because your body literally cannot handle it. You just can't, depending on how severe the loss is. And then gradually the brain starts to put things back together again. But the energetic loss of somebody that's been close to you can go on for a long time. And then the thought process also has to be reworked, as you were mentioning, Carol. So Nancy, you want to add to that?
Yes, I think it's such an important topic that you're bringing up, Carol, because I hear and see so often, both with human loss and pet loss, people think if they're not suffering, that they're not honoring their departed.
Good point, Nancy. Go on.
Yes, it's a very skewed perception that can be changed. But I think that is where one of the reasons why people get stuck in grief is they feel disloyal. They feel, whether it's a pet or not, a pet or human. And so I think that's a really important piece of the healing to help people change that perception, that mindset.
And what do you say to somebody who feels that way? How do you help them to shift that mindset about, oh, if I know the one person said it, one of my clients said to me, it was like if she stopped grieving, that she would actually lose the person, that grieving helped keep that connection.
Yeah. Well, again, I think that's a process of reframing the role, the meaning, how you reinvent yourself around it. It's all those pieces. I don't think there's one specific tool or answer. It's a journey of moving forward through grief. And part of that is also addressing the guilt, because guilt is like the number one experience, especially with pet loss, because there is the option of euthanizing, and then pet parents go into contortions, as I did myself, about, do I have the right to do this? When do I do it? How do I do it? So unraveling all those pieces, I think, is really the bottom line answer to how you help people move from that state of feeling that grief is suffering to processing it through.
Yeah, to understanding it as a physical response, and that the thoughts often come, and you need to work with your thoughts, because you can actually re-trigger the grief over and over and over again. You could go on. I actually had a client who had been grieving for 20 years for the loss of her husband, and we worked together, and in the first 3 weeks she stopped grieving. She stopped grieving because I gave her permission to grieve. And for me, when I work with a client that's grieving, is to teach them how to grieve without letting the mind jump in. That is, to really experience it physiologically, rather than letting the mind kind of lead your body, because you can get into this feedback loop where you get sorry, and then you have thoughts, and then that makes more grief, and then you have more thoughts, and it just goes, it cycles around and around and around. Okay, so any other comments, any questions about that particular point, about how to pay attention to your thoughts, and also to separate the physiological experience of grief from the thoughts, which Carol so well presented as the avenue to suffering if you allow your thoughts to get out of control. And why don't we say a little bit about the guilt? Where does that come from? Carol,
Well,
you know a lot about guilt. You can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not often just about the loss itself and moving on with one's life. It has to do about the relationship we've had with that individual or the pet itself. You know, the things that could have or should have been said, the coulda, shouldas. And did I do enough? Could I have done more? And oftentimes we can't do or say that which is not going to be received. And so we need to allow ourselves to complete that cycle of communication within our own selves. And we experience so many losses and disappointments of expectation around our relationships with people. So it's not just the death of a person, it's all the accumulated losses that we've had over the years with incomplete conversations with people that we cannot resolve because they're no longer there. We have to resolve them within ourselves. And to be able to do that, we have to accept that it might not have been a perfect relationship, that that person might not have been able to receive what we wanted to express, and accept that as it is. There's a lot of acceptance that goes into completing a cycle of communication so that we don't carry it with us for a lifetime. There are things that we don't need to feel guilty about any longer, because there's nothing that we could have done then, and there's nothing that we could have done now. So in allowing and accepting something as it is, we can begin to release that pain.
I also
Yeah,
think
go
that
on. Yes,
that-
Nancy.
one of the areas that I specialize in for this very reason is the stage of anticipatory grief, where you do have the opportunity, because the person or the pet is still alive, to heal any of those kinds of relationships or things that you feel guilty about. Or I remember when my dad was on hospice suddenly, and he died within 2 weeks, that one of my questions to him was at his bedside, is there anything we need to discuss? Is there any unhealed, unfinished business? And it's a big question to ask. I was prepared to do that kind of conversation with him, but a lot of people are afraid to have that conversation. And yet it's that conversation that has the potential to bring so much healing, and in that process eliminate so much of the guilt after the loss. So it's such an important window, I think, where people just need to gather some courage. And I think it's really surprising that within families where there isn't a lot of communication, there's not a lot of honesty, that when people have risked to have those conversations, it's actually, from my experience with clients, been well received.
Well, and it helps if you have support of a coach that can talk you through it and give you the courage, because sometimes it's really, really scary, because you don't want to hurt the person's dying. How could you bring this stuff up? You don't want to make them miserable, and you don't want to make their suffering any greater, or they may really shoo you away. And so it can be a challenge. And yet you're so right. You have brought the elephant into the room, or you've called the elephant that's in the room, which is that a lot of the grief stems from those last actions that were taken or not taken before somebody died, and that we can learn to be proactive and have those conversations. One of the things I remember after my parents died, I was living in a communal home, and one of our members, his sister had some terrible medical crisis, really serious. And she was back in Chicago and he was waiting. And I said, Jean, don't wait, go back. You don't know what's going to happen. You will kick yourself if you were not there. And he did go back and he was there when she died.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
Great.
So your point about, be there, to show up, that body experience of seeing somebody die. That's why, what you were talking about, the pet loss, if you're not there and they've taken the pet off to the hospital. That's why COVID has been so difficult, because a lot of people died alone. They didn't have their families around them.
Yeah, that's been very, very difficult for so many people. And, that's another part of the process of accepting that you can only do what you can do under the circumstances, and being able to accept that. It's really important to have acceptance for the limitations that we have at any given time.
But are there workarounds? What can we do to work around? What can we do? Like you talked, Carol, about the regrets, and you said, well, people have to change their mind, but are there things that they can do? Is there a way in which you can have that conversation, even though the person is deceased, and let that particular unspoken words have a release?
Yes, absolutely. You can write a letter to the person.
Excellent. Yeah.
And you could ask somebody that you trust to sit there with you, in front of you, and have them be the representation of the person that you wanted
Brilliant.
to express what you needed to express to, so that it actually gets out of the mind and out of the body.
Really, really, really good point. Janet, I noticed that you just joined us, and I want you to understand that this is an open panel discussion. If you have questions on any of the things that we're talking about, or your own question about handling grief during the holidays, thank you. Go ahead and raise your hand. Are you raising your hand, or you're saying hi? Thank you. Do you have anything to ask, Janet? If you do, you're muted. Okay, so Nancy, did you want to address any of the things that Carol and I were talking about how, okay, you missed that opportunity, now what?
Oh, you mean, so they've missed the opportunity, the person has passed, now what? Well, that's I think where finding someone professional to help you through that process is so critical, because grief, whether it's human and especially when it's pet loss, is really meant to be shared. It's a journey, it's not an event. And the more people feel they have someone that they can talk to about it and express it, and it's someone professional who knows, how to deal with it, how to help them through that journey, that's a critical, I think, really critical piece that's missing for a lot of people.
Do some people who have lost a pet feel what they call disenfranchised grief? You know what disenfranchised grief means?
Totally. Yes. Yes.
Explain that to our audience, and how, in particular, people who have lost pets their grief is not really acknowledged.
No, it's not validated. You don't get time off.
You don't get time off from work.
Yeah, you don't get that leave of absence for death in the family. You don't get the airline ticket to go, if you need to go somewhere, like let's say a family member's pet was, like your cousin, So pets are, for most people, I think I just read a statistic, it's like almost all, not 100%, but almost all pet owners feel that their pet is a family member or their child. And so that is becoming a little bit more recognized, but that's the piece that really needs to happen for people to feel comfortable with grief, and to help and support other people, other pet parents, for example, who are going through grief. So one of the things that I do with my clients is educate them on how to educate others. So when you help your client learn, what is it they need, or maybe they don't even know what they need, but maybe they can ask the question, I don't know what I need. Can you brainstorm with me? What do you think might help right now? And that's a way then to invite the person who wants to support you to try and support you just in figuring out how to support you. So it could be that basic.
So what do you think about people who, after they lose a pet, they go out and get another one?
I think that is 9.9 times out of 10, probably not the best course of action immediately following a loss, because with any loss, you have to grieve. And I can speak to this from experience because way back when I had cats instead of dogs, many decades ago, I did that very thing. I lost a cat that was dear to me. I went out and I got another one that looked just like her, and then I couldn't attach.
Mm-hmm.
That is the problem. And so it's really not even fair to the pet when you get one so suddenly. Now, there are certain situations where I would say there's an exception, and that is with service dogs. As the service dog has a different role than a pet, and the replacement for that may be really a critical piece for someone's functioning. And so I think the big thing that I work with people is the both and, not the either or. Okay, so you get a new pet. It doesn't mean you stop the grieving process to completion with the pet that you lost.
Right. And by the way, those of you who are inclined to do that, one of the things that a lot of us are taught in very early childhood is the solution to loss is to replace the loss. And as Nancy points out, it often either stops your grief and you never quite bond with whoever it is you're taking on. There's sort of this disconnect. It's really important to allow those emotions. So Nancy, thank you. That was a really good point. And before we continue, I notice, first of all, Carol apologizes because her camera keeps freezing. I told you it's the solar flares. So she has to unplug and plug it back in. Thank you for hanging in there. Janet has posted something in the chat, and she says she's in the car and can't ask questions at the moment, but she's in the COVID situation. Her dad died earlier this year. The tragedy is that as a nurse and as someone recovered and cleared from COVID infection, I couldn't be at his bedside until the end. Also experiencing COVID fatigue along with other colleagues. Oh my gosh, my heart and soul goes out to you for being in the trenches and dealing with all that loss. This is a time to really nurture yourself. Carol, Nancy, would you like to respond to some of the comments that Janet posted?
First of all, I want to really acknowledge that your service is so profound and necessary. And by the same token, how do you take care of yourself as well? And I can't begin to even imagine or know what you're going through. And so I want to be upfront about that. But as the very little things that you can do to nourish yourself, to take care of yourself, the little moments that you might have take advantage of and not feel guilty about the need to take care of yourself. It's really going to be important for you to not feel guilty about thinking of yourself in the midst of needing to take care of so many others, and not having been there as much as you have wanted to for your father. I was mentioning before that we can only do what we can do, and what we can't do doesn't negate or define the whole relationship with the person that has passed, with your father. So I'm not sure exactly what you're feeling about that, and not having been able to be there with him but the fact that you were there for him in the very end and were able to be with him, I'm sure, or I would hope that that gives you some comfort.
Thank you, Carol. That was very, very well said. I hope that Janet can take heart in some of what you said about that. And you made a really good point about that guilt of taking that time for yourself when you're in the midst of caring for others. And so, Janet, basically you're on continuous caregiver assignment, which most of us, we are caregiving for our parents for a while, or our spouse or our children, and then life changes, but you're there forever. And how do you balance that with your own needs? Now, when I was doing presentations about caregiving, the number one thing I said is you have to take care of yourself. If you don't take care of yourself and you're not there because you get sick or you die first, where does that leave the other person? So you actually have a responsibility to take care of yourself for the others. And then, Carol, the point about forgiving yourself for the circumstances. And I guess
Well, I wouldn't say forgive, because it's not a word that's really in my vocabulary. Because there's nothing to forgive. It's just accepting what you could and couldn't do, what you were able and not able to do at any given time. So it's not about forgiving, because there's nothing to forgive.
I understand what you're saying. I have a different sense of the meaning of forgiveness because of the work that I've done. And I see it more as letting yourself off the hook, of taking yourself off the hook, that it isn't like that you did anything wrong, but that your mind, for whatever reason, has put you on the hook and you need to unhook yourself. And that's what forgiveness practice is about. And there are specific things that you can do to help you to get off that hook, which I'm sure, Carol, you have many, many practices that you give your clients for doing that.
Yes.
I think forgiveness is really,
Nancy, could you speak up a little louder? You're a little low.
yes, I think that forgiveness is really is the same coin, other side of surrender, of acceptance. It's not either or, they are both, I think, true. And I think forgiveness is an aspect of a practice that does help you move through guilt. And I think that's an important piece that people can get.
Thank you. So we are getting towards the end of the show. And I want to give both of you a chance to talk about how people can get in touch with you. And if you have any sort of free gift or way for them to engage with you, to go ahead and share that now so that people have a chance to ask you questions if there are any questions. So Nancy, why don't you go first and mention what you...
Sure. Everything I have, or not everything, but most everything I have to help people connect with me is on my Linktree, which is Linktree/Nancy Gordon Global.
And you're going to put that in the chat also, please, because then when I post this recording later, I can put that next to the recording.
Yeah, so there are ways where you can access me through my writing, articles, videos, podcast interviews, and then I also offer a 15-20 minute consultation around loss and grief that you can access, me and see if you want to work further with me.
Okay, Nancy, thank you. And Carol, go ahead. I noticed that you did post your contact information in the chat. Would you like to say anything about who might want to reach out to you, what they would be looking for, and what kind of support you provide?
Sure. So I work with people that are going through grief, that are going through any type of loss, whether it's a loved one, pet, or accumulated grief, whether it's societal grief, situational grief, any kind of loss that puts you in a state of transition and not being able to move forward. And you can go to my website, which is there. I'm also offering a free call, 30-minute call. And you can also get information from my Moving Beyond Grief site and get a guide there as well.
Awesome. So I actually have a grief guide, an illustrated grief guide on my old website. I have a new website, but the old one is secretsoflifeanddeath.com. And there is an illustrated guide that talks about what you can do in the early stages of grief. And it also comes with follow-up emails that direct you towards blogs that I've written on the subject of grief and loss and how you can cope with grief and loss over time. Any final questions from the peanut gallery up there? Have you gotten what you were looking for? This is an opportunity to make your needs met. Chia, I see your face there. What would you like to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to add and offer that I did attend a grief group with you. It was probably about 6 years ago. And it was right after my dear angel kitty, she was a petite black and white tuxedo, had passed. She was with me for 18 years and I was beside myself. And my mother had just passed the month before. And so, but the grief over my cat was the greatest. And so I just want to, let anybody who's listening now, or maybe later, that if they have any sense about, well, this isn't right, I'm feeling too much about my kitty or my dog or whatever the precious pet is, that it's okay. It's really okay. And yeah, just that it's real, that it takes time. I would not recommend that someone go right out and get another one, as you were discussing. We need to be with ourselves and really understand, what the loss, what the life of our little creature was to us. And yeah, it was significant for me. And 6 years ago, and I have a favorite photo of her up on a wall. And yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Chia. Of course.
Yeah, just really important.
To remind everybody that pet love is unconditional love. It is not complicated like most of human love. And so when you lose that, you lose it's like you lose divine love. It's huge. Exactly. So thank you for sharing that.
And when I was in your group and everyone else was talking about, a person, I didn't even care. It's like, I'm here for my cat. And I went on to another grief group for a short while as well. It's like, I am here for my cat. So That's beautiful. Really okay.
And when I was running grief groups at hospice, a lot of times people would have a partner loss and then they would lose a pet, and they actually found that they were grieving the pet more.
Yeah.
What I like to say, and I think, Carol, you intimated this, is that all grief is connected, especially the griefs that you have never finished grieving. That when you have this grief and you start grieving, then the other ones come up and say, hey, me too, me too. So it's really good to recognize that as well. Rita, I see your hand is up, and I would like to hear from you before we close the call. Go ahead.
Yeah, my grief isn't a person who has passed. It's someone who has gotten into addictions and is no longer in my life. It's my daughter, my only child. And during this holiday season, I found myself the other night just crying deeply because, and it's been 11 years, and she's with a man who is completely psychopathic. So it's a double heartbreaker.
It's hard, and it goes on too, because there's always this potential, and yet also that powerlessness. Rita, sending healing to you and to your daughter. Nancy or Carol, would you like to say anything to Rita? Yes, Nancy.
I would really, I appreciate your personal experience with group work, because I think that's such a powerful.
Oh,
Nancy, you froze.
yeah.
Uh,
Oh, darn it.
Yeah, well, we'll get back to her. Carol, do you have
Okay.
Nancy? Whoops.
I'm here.
Okay,
there you
so
are.
we lost, it's such a powerful and bloop.
Okay, so groups are such a powerful and often more cost-effective way to work. I do groups as well, support groups. So Rita, I would really encourage you to find some groups for parents of addicted children.
Yeah, I'm in Naranon. You know.
Okay, that's one,
But
but there
you know, it's kind of a sad thing. I get more depressed when I go there because
That's the problem sometimes with the groups.
about a professionally facilitated group
yes, I agree.
for,
Mhm.
for parents of addicted children and adult children.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. And
What you
Carol?
want, in fact, sometimes a coach is better than a therapist because a coach is going to set goals for you and give you the tools you need to move forward.
Okay.
As opposed to telling the story over and over again, which is
Yes.
what I had mentioned earlier, is that you get caught in that loop and you actually make yourself feel worse.
And
So-
hearing other people go over and over and over, it's like,
Yes, it becomes very despairing. So if that's not working for you, there are other options. So keep
Okay.
looking for sure.
Great.
Thank you for sharing. Carol, did you
welcome.
have,
Yes.
pardon?
Go ahead, Rita.
no, I was just asking if Carol, yeah, because you said,
Yes, I have worked with people that have members of their family and loved ones that have suffered from addiction. And I do work with people like yourself.
mhm,
And it's really important to know that you're always going to be there for your daughter,
mhm,
and to accept that this is her journey in life.
mhm.
Each of us comes in with our own
Thank you.
journey to live and to learn lessons from. And some of us are there for you to learn what you need to learn. And that might sound harsh and difficult, but sometimes we have things happen in our lives for us to learn certain lessons and to grow and evolve.
I so believe that 100%.
Yeah.
Really, really good point, Carol.
Yes,
Really
yes, thank
excellent.
you. Great.
Okay, so
You're welcome.
Harriet, do you have any final comments before we close the call?
I really am glad that I participated, and I appreciate the work that has been done and continues to need to be done around grief. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. And thank you for being here and sharing your stories and questions about communal grief. And thank you all for showing up today. And please reach out to these lovely ladies or go ahead and get my my offering, the audio that will help you to release the emotional side of things. And if you want to have a conversation with me, you're welcome to a 30-minute introductory conversation. We work with people who have worked on their grief for a while and are ready to move to the next phase of their life. But I have lots of experience with helping people to get there as well. Okay, so thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Carol, for joining me and making this show really, really valuable. One more thing I want to mention in the holidays is be willing to bring the lost loved one to the table in your holiday. You know, especially if they've died. It's kind of like that other elephant in the room. It's like bring them to the table, invite people to talk about if you're celebrating a gathering, a social gathering, that is actually less painful than pretending that nothing happened. So that's my final tip. Any final tips from you or Nancy? Yes.
I have a final message from someone who, or some, yeah, I guess someone character. especially for people who are having a difficult time facing loss and grief. And that is this quote: "If there was ever a tomorrow when we're not together, there is something you must always remember. You are braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, smarter than you think, and loved more than you'll ever know." And that's by Winnie the Pooh.
I love it. Thank you. Really great.
Thank you.
And Carol, how about you?
Allow yourself to be where you are without guilt or shame, and ask for support if you want it, and share how you want to be supported, because people around you might not know how to support you. So it would help them to support you if you told them how support looks to you and what it feels like to you.
Excellent words of wisdom. For the rest of you, have a blessed holiday. And I will be back with New Year's stuff. In the New Year's, it'll be the second Tuesday of the month. And I have two people, amazing people, who are talking about setting goals for the New Year's. You may not be ready for that yet, but maybe by the New Year, you will be. All right. You have a happy holiday, or a peaceful holiday, at least, and be blessed. And bye for now.
Thank you so much. Thank you all so much.
You're welcome.
Welcome, Rita.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
And sending love and healing to all of you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye.